The storm did not just rattle the windows, it rattled his heart. In a quiet Texas town, Mark Henderson, a widowed father, stood at the window of his modest home, watching the wind tear through the streets like an angry beast. It was nearly 900 p.m., and while the storm grew louder, he knew his duty remained the same: protect his little girl. He carried a warm mug of cocoa down the hallway, the faint hum of an old heater fighting the creeping chill. Inside her bedroom, his daughter Sophie, no more than 6 years old, lay curled beneath the covers, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. She looked up with sleepy eyes that flickered with both fear and trust. "Daddy," she whispered, "is the storm strong enough to take our house away?" Mark knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair from her face. His voice was calm, steady, the way only a father's could be. He told her that their home, though small and worn, was strong enough to stand against anything. He kissed her forehead, his lips lingering just a second longer, because nights like this reminded him of how fragile life really was. As thunder cracked and the lights flickered, Mark began humming a gentle tune to ease Sophie into sleep. For a moment, the chaos outside faded. But just as he stepped into the hallway, a violent knock at the door echoed through the storm, a knock so loud, so urgent, it sent a chill deeper than the wind itself. The knock came again. Harder this time, almost desperate. Mark's pulse quickened. Who could be out there in such a storm? Grabbing his jacket, he unlatched the door, and the wind nearly ripped it from his grip. Standing on the porch was a woman soaked to the bone, her hair plastered against her pale face. Beside her clung a little boy, shivering in a drenched sweater. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her teeth chattering from the cold. "My car broke down the road. We've been walking for half an hour. We have nowhere else to go." Mark's eyes widened in disbelief as recognition hit him. This wasn't just any stranger. This was Catherine Reed, the CEO of the company where he worked. He'd seen her name in emails, her face in glossy newsletters, always polished and untouchable. Now here she was, trembling, vulnerable, clutching her son like a lifeline. Without hesitation, Mark stepped aside. "Come in quickly," he urged, pulling them into the warmth of his modest living room. The heater hummed in the corner, but the chill in their soaked clothes still made them tremble. He rushed to fetch towels, handing one to Catherine and draping another around the boy's shoulders. "You both must be freezing," he said gently, before darting to the kitchen to boil water. As the kettle hissed, he could hear the boy's small, shaky voice. "Mom, are we safe now?" Catherine's reply was soft but weary. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe." When Mark returned with steaming mugs of tea, he saw her eyes glisten in the dim lamplight. She explained how their car had failed in the downpour, how no one had answered her desperate calls. The storm had nearly swallowed them whole until they found his porch light flickering through the rain. For a moment, Mark glanced at Sophie's bedroom door, then back at Catherine and her boy. His little home had always felt too small, too fragile, yet tonight it was the only shelter between fear and safety, despair and hope. The warmth of the tea had barely returned color to Catherine's cheeks when a small voice floated from the hallway. Sophie peeked out her wide eyes, curious about the strangers in her living room. Mark waved her over. "Come say hello, sweetheart. This is Mrs. Reed and her son Daniel." The little boy stepped closer to his mother, clutching the towel tighter. Sophie approached cautiously, her stuffed rabbit still tucked under her arm. For a tense moment, the children only stared at each other, caught between shyness and intrigue. Then Sophie quietly draped her blanket around Daniel's shoulders. His lips quivered into the smallest smile, and something unspoken passed between them. A bond born not of words, but of shared uncertainty. The room suddenly felt warmer. Mark watched with quiet relief as Sophie sat beside Daniel, offering him a cookie from the jar on the coffee table. Catherine's tired eyes softened, watching her son nibble cautiously, before finally letting out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. Mark excused himself, rummaging through the closet until he found an old sweater and sweatpants that might fit Catherine. At first she hesitated, her pride tugging against the gesture. But the storm outside left her little choice. When she emerged from the bathroom in the oversized clothes, she looked less like the polished executive he'd glimpsed at company meetings, and more like any other mother, simply trying to keep her child safe. "You didn't have to do all this?" she murmured, her voice fragile. Mark shook his head. No one should face a storm alone. The words hung in the air heavier than the rain drumming on the roof. Around them the storm raged on, but inside that modest home, a fragile peace was taking root, one formed by blankets, cocoa, and the simple kindness of strangers who were quickly becoming something more. As the night deepened, the children finally drifted into sleep on the couch, Sophie's rabbit tucked between them, like a silent guardian. The storm outside showed no mercy, rattling the windows and shaking the walls, but inside the house carried a softer hum of breathing, of crackling heat, of two adults finally able to exhale. Catherine sat at the edge of her seat, hands wrapped around a half-empty mug of tea, staring at her son's peaceful face. "It's been so long since I've seen him this calm," she whispered almost to herself. Mark nodded, his gaze lingering on Sophie's small hand resting gently against Daniel's. Raising a child alone, he began, his voice heavy with experience. "Some days it feels like carrying the whole world on your back, but then they smile and suddenly it's worth every ache." Catherine's eyes glistened. "People see me in boardrooms and assume I have everything figured out. They don't see the nights I stay awake wondering if I'm enough for him for me." Her words cracked under the weight of exhaustion she could no longer hide. Mark leaned back, his tired eyes meeting hers. "I may not know about boardrooms, but I know about empty nights. I've questioned myself more times than I can count, but I've learned something." He paused, searching for the right words. "Being enough isn't about having all the answers. It's about being there, showing up, even when you're running on empty." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm roared thunder, rolling like a drumbeat in the distance. Yet in that small living room, the silence between them wasn't empty, it was full. Full of shared struggles, unspoken fears, and the quiet recognition that two lives, though different in so many ways, carried the same lonely weight. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt quite so alone. By morning, the storm showed no sign of easing. Fallen branches littered the street, and the roads glistened with deep puddles. The call from the tow company confirmed what Catherine had already feared: her car wouldn't be retrieved until the following day. She hesitated as she told Mark, her voice carrying a note of guilt. But before she could apologize for overstaying, he cut her off with a steady smile. "You don't need to rush out just to sit in some cold motel room," he said. "Stay here, both of you, at least until it's safe." Relief washed over her face, though she tried to hide it. Daniel, however, made no attempt to mask his joy. He and Sophie had already begun building a blanket fort in the living room, their laughter ringing louder than the storm outside. The day unfolded with an unexpected ease. Catherine joined Mark in the kitchen, surprising him when she admitted she enjoyed cooking, but rarely had time for it. Together they chopped vegetables and stirred a pot of stew, their shoulders brushing now and then as they moved in rhythm. It was nothing extravagant, but the shared task felt like a glimpse into a life neither had dared imagine, simple, ordinary, and oddly comforting. When another power outage plunged the house into darkness, no one panicked. Instead, Mark lit candles, and the four of them gathered around an old board game. The children squealed with excitement, their small hands racing across the pieces, while laughter spilled from Catherine's lips, light, unguarded, and genuine. Mark caught himself watching her, noticing how easily she slipped into the rhythm of his home, how natural her smile looked in the candlelight. And for the first time, he wondered if the storm wasn't just a disruption, but perhaps a strange gift to own that had brought two weary souls together under the same roof. As the hours slipped by, the storm outside slowly softened to a drizzle, but the glow within Mark's home only grew brighter. Candlelight flickered across Catherine's face as she leaned over the board game, her laughter bubbling up in a way that seemed almost foreign to her. She wasn't the commanding executive who filled conference rooms with authority. Here she was simply a mother, playful and tender, her guard lowered in a way Mark had never seen. When the children finally tired their makeshift blanket castle, still standing proudly in the corner, Mark tucked Sophie into bed, while Catherine carried Daniel to the guest room. She lingered by his side until his breathing slowed into a peaceful rhythm. When she emerged into the hallway, her shoulders sagged with visible relief. Mark met her eyes. "You look like you've been holding your breath for years," he said gently. Catherine gave a soft laugh, shaking her head. "At work, I'm expected to be unshakable, strong. But here in this little house with your daughter's drawings on the fridge and the smell of stew in the air, it feels different. It feels like what I've been missing." Mark's gaze softened. He glanced around his modest home, its worn furniture and faded rugs, suddenly seeing it through her eyes. To him, it had always been just enough a shelter, a place to raise his daughter. But to Catherine, it seemed to be something far more, proof that love and stability didn't come from wealth or power, but from presence and care. For a long moment they stood there in the quiet, the storm's final raindrops tapping softly against the window. Two single parents, both weary from battles fought in silence, found themselves recognizing in each other what they had long craved, not perfection, but peace. By the next morning, the skies had cleared, leaving the town scattered with broken branches and puddles that shimmered in the sunlight. The storm had passed, but its echo still lingered in the quiet of Mark's home. The children groaned when Catherine explained that the tow truck would finally come for her car. Sophie clung to Daniel's hand, while he frowned, unwilling to let go of the adventures they had started together. Mark loaded their few belongings into the back of his old pickup, the weight of the moment pressing down heavier than the bags themselves. Catherine stood near the porch, her hair pulled back, the borrowed sweater still draped over her shoulders. She looked at him, her voice low. "I don't know how to thank you for all of this." He shook his head gently. "You already have." She seemed to understand the deeper meaning, though she didn't press it. When she finally climbed into the passenger seat, her eyes lingered on the small house as if memorizing it. The ride to meet the tow truck was quiet, the kind of silence filled with everything neither of them knew how to say. When they parted, her handshake lingered too long, her thank you carrying far more than gratitude. Mark drove back alone, the truck rattling against the patched roads, but his heart heavy with something new, a sense that the storm had left more behind than damage. It had left the possibility of change. A week later, that possibility became real. Mark was called into the executive office, nerves tightening as he walked through the glass doors. To his surprise, there was Catherine, rested, composed, but with warmth in her smile that only he had seen. Sliding an envelope across the desk, she said, "I've been thinking about the way you opened your home, Mark. You didn't just give us shelter, you gave us dignity, and I want to give something back." Inside was a promotion offer, a raise and flexible hours, so he could spend more time with Sophie. For the first time in a long while, Mark was stunned not by life's storms, but by its unexpected blessings. Weeks rolled into months, and what began as a night of chance soon blossomed into a bond neither Mark nor Catherine could have predicted. Their children became the bridge. Sophie begging to see Daniel, asking for playdates with Sophie. What started as weekend park visits grew into shared picnics beneath sprawling oaks, movie nights with popcorn spilling over the couch and lazy afternoons where the children's laughter filled every corner of Mark's modest home. Catherine, once a figure Mark had only glimpsed from afar at company events, seemed to transform in his presence. At the park, she traded her polished heels for sneakers, chasing after the kids, as though the weight of her executive world had been lifted. At Mark's kitchen table, she laughed freely, helping Sophie with her drawings, while Daniel proudly showed Mark the Lego towers he built. Mark noticed the subtle shifts, the way Catherine's eyes softened when she looked around his home, the ease with which she blended into his world. And Catherine, too, found herself drawn to Mark's quiet strength, his unwavering patience as a father, and the steady warmth he carried into every room. He didn't see her as a CEO who commanded attention. He saw her as a mother, a woman who had weathered her own storms and still stood tall. One evening, as the children lay sprawled on the floor, asleep after an exhausting day of play, Catherine lingered at the doorway, a mug of tea in her hands. She whispered, "It's strange the storm that nearly broke us ended up giving us this." Mark met her gaze, the unspoken truth between them undeniable. Sometimes life's fiercest tempests didn't just tear things apart. They also brought the right people together. Months later, one golden evening, Mark stood on his porch as the sun melted into shades of orange and pink across the Texas sky. In the yard, Sophie and Daniel chased each other through the grass, their laughter ringing like music against the hum of cicadas. Beside him, Catherine stepped forward with 2 mugs of tea, her smile soft and knowing. They didn't need many words anymore. Their silence carried the weight of everything that storm had given them. Mark glanced at her, recalling the night she had stood shivering on his doorstep, desperate and afraid. Who could have imagined that the pounding on his door would one day open the door to something greater? Not just friendship, not just kindness, but a new beginning. As the children collapsed into the grass, giggling beneath the fading sky, Catherine whispered, "Funny how a storm can change everything." Mark nodded his chest, tightening with gratitude. Sometimes, he said, storms don't just destroy. Sometimes they bring us the people we were meant to find. And in that moment, the storm that had once threatened their safety became forever remembered as the blessing that rewrote their lives. Life's storms come in many forms: loss, hardship, unexpected trials. But often hidden within them are the very moments that lead us to deeper connections, second chances, and unexpected grace. Sometimes what feels like chaos is really life's way of guiding us toward what matters most. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe storms can bring unexpected blessings? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, hope, and love.